First story, the darkness below. I remember the first time I heard the whispers coming from the basement. It was a chilly October evening, and I was home alone in our old house in Pinecrest. My parents were out for the night, leaving me to fend for myself. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows like the ghostly fingers of the past. As I settled in for a long night of horror movies, I began to hear it again. A low murmur, barely audible, drifting up from the basement stairs. I paused the film, straining my ears to catch the words. It sounded like a child's laughter mixed with something darker. I swallowed hard and decided to investigate. The basement door creaked ominously as I opened it. The smell of damp earth and mildew hit me like a wave. The light bulb flickered above, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. I stepped down the cold wooden stairs, each creak echoing in the stillness. As I reached the bottom, the whispers grew louder. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the laughter wasn't playful at all. It sounded like a warning. I took a few steps further into the darkness, my heart racing as I spotted something small in the corner. It was a dusty old doll, its glass eyes staring blankly at me. I picked it up, and a sense of dread washed over me. The whispers turned into frantic cries, pleading for help, and I dropped the doll in shock. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me. Panic surged through my veins as I pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The cries grew louder, more insistent, echoing in my mind. "Help us!" they screamed, and I felt the air grow cold around me. I looked back at the doll, and to my horror, it had moved closer, its mouth twisted into a wicked grin. I stumbled back, but the whispers wrapped around me, pulling me closer to the doll. In that moment, I realized the truth. It wasn't just a doll. It was a vessel for something trapped in the darkness, something that fed on fear. The stories I'd heard about the house being cursed flashed through my mind. In a desperate attempt, I shouted, "Leave me alone!" But my voice was drowned out by the cacophony of cries. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging me into darkness. I felt the doll's tiny fingers clutching at my arm, its laughter now a horrifying shriek. With all my strength, I threw myself against the door and it flew open. I bolted up the stairs, not looking back until I was safely in the living room. The basement door slammed shut behind me, and the whispers faded into silence. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something is still down there. The doll was never found, and sometimes when the wind howls just right, I can still hear those whispers calling out from the darkness below. Second story, the depths of shadows. I don't know why I ever agreed to move into this house. It was an old place, hidden deep in the woods outside of Sutter's Hill, a small town no one ever talked about much. I liked the idea of living in isolation, with only trees and quiet nights to keep me company. But then I discovered the basement. The realtor hadn't mentioned it during the tour, probably hoping I wouldn't notice. But I did. The small wooden door, tucked behind the kitchen pantry, looked out of place, as though it was trying to hide. I opened it out of curiosity one night, late after dinner. The stairs led down into pitch darkness, the kind that swallows every bit of light you try to throw at it. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something was off. The air was thick, heavier than it should have been, as if the very walls were breathing. I stood there, staring down into that abyss, my hand gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. I had no reason to go down there, but something drew me in, something that didn't belong in this world. I found the courage to descend into the shadows the following morning, determined to confront whatever secrets the house held. My flashlight barely penetrated the gloom, but it was enough to see the basement was much larger than I had imagined. The floor was covered in dust, like no one had been there for years. Boxes lined the walls, their contents forgotten or abandoned, and the air smelled of mold and damp earth. I was about to leave when I heard it. A faint shuffling sound, like something being dragged across the floor. My heart skipped a beat, and I swung the flashlight in every direction, but there was nothing. Just silence. But then the noise came again, this time louder, closer. It was coming from the far corner of the basement, where the shadows seemed thicker. I hesitated, but curiosity got the best of me. I slowly walked toward the sound, my feet stirring up the dust with every step. As I reached the corner, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into total darkness. I stood frozen, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run. But I didn't. Instead, I waited, holding my breath, listening. Then I felt it brush past me, cold and heavy, like a whisper of air that shouldn't have been there. I stumbled back, fumbling for the flashlight as panic began to set in. When I finally got it to flicker on, there was nothing. No trace of whatever had moved through the basement with me. I was alone, or so I thought. As I turned to leave, I saw it out of the corner of my eye. A shape in the darkness, low to the ground, watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I swung the flashlight toward it. At first, I thought it was a pile of old rags, but then it moved. Slowly, rising up from the floor, was a creature that seemed to be made entirely of shadow. Its body was hunched over, long and thin, with limbs that stretched unnaturally as it crawled toward me. The worst part was its eyes. They glowed faintly in the beam of the flashlight, 2 pinpricks of light in the void. They were fixed on me, unblinking and cold. The thing moved slowly, deliberately, as if it knew I had nowhere to go. I turned and bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My heart raced, my skin crawling with the sensation of being watched. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the basement door, waiting for something to happen. But it didn't come after me. For days, I avoided the basement, keeping the door locked and telling myself it was just my imagination. But I could feel it down there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me. Every time I passed by, the air felt colder, heavier, and I could hear faint sounds coming from below. Scratching, dragging, like something trying to crawl up from the depths. Last night, I heard the door creak open on its own. The thing from the basement is coming for me. The third is the story, Whispers in the Dark. I remember the first time I heard it. A low rumble echoing from the basement of my old house on Maple Street. My parents always warned me not to go down there, claiming it was filled with memories better left forgotten. But curiosity has a way of creeping in, doesn't it? One evening, while my parents were out, I decided to investigate. The air was thick with anticipation as I approached the door. I hesitated, but the whispering grew louder, almost beckoning me to come closer. I took a deep breath, turned the knob, and the door creaked open. The basement was dark and musty, a narrow beam of moonlight filtering through a small window. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside, the wood stairs groaning under my weight. Shadows danced across the walls, but it was the sound that caught my attention again. It was a faint voice whispering my name. Ethan. Ethan? It called, echoing off the damp walls. My heart raced, but I felt compelled to follow the sound. I wandered deeper into the basement, the air growing colder with each step. Old boxes lined the walls, filled with dust and memories. I passed by a broken mirror that reflected my pale face, and for a moment I thought I saw someone standing behind me. I spun around, but the basement was empty. Just silence. I shook my head to clear the fog of fear. "Get a grip, Ethan," I muttered to myself. The whispering resumed, now more urgent. "Ethan, come play." As I ventured further, I stumbled upon an old trunk in the corner. The whispers intensified, urging me to open it. My hands trembled as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, I found a collection of worn toys, dolls with cracked porcelain faces, a rusted toy train, and a small music box. As I touched the music box, it sprang to life, playing a haunting melody. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the whispers changed into frantic cries. "Ethan! Get out!" they screamed, piercing through the air. Panic surged within me, and I bolted for the stairs. But as I turned, the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. In a panic, I banged on the door, shouting for help. The whispers morphed into laughter, dark and twisted. "You wanted to play, didn't you?" The voice echoed all around me, sending chills down my spine. I turned back to the trunk, feeling an overwhelming urge to flee. The toys seemed to watch me, their eyes following my every move. With one last surge of adrenaline, I sprinted to the corner, throwing everything in my path aside. I felt the cold grip of something tugging at my legs, but I didn't look back. I finally reached the door, slamming my shoulder against it, desperate to escape. With a loud crack, the door gave way, and I tumbled out onto the living room floor. Gasping for breath, I glanced back to the basement. It was silent now. But I knew better than to think it was over. The whispers had followed me up, lurking in the shadows. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard them again, softly calling my name from the basement. I realized that some doors are better left closed.